and today we're going to get started about going through Chapter 3 on how to build a broken archway using a different technique than what was covered in the previous chapter. To get started, I'm going to go to File, go down to the Project window, and I'm going to create myself a new project. So click on the New button. We'll call this one Ch3 Broken Arch Sullivan. So utilize the prefix that I've provided here along with your last name at the end of it, and then when it comes to locations, make sure you click on the little folder here and choose a location. When you choose a location, be sure that you're not actually sticking it inside of another existing project. Okay, give me a minute here. Alright, so this is where I'm going to put my new project folder. Choose select and then choose accept. And once again, before I press accept, you can identify the location of where you just created that new project. Alright, so now that we've done that, as we did in the last chapter, we want to make sure that we've got source image files for us to work with. So I'm going to come over to my Finder and go into the Broken Archway project that came with the textbook, which again I don't advise that you actually use as your project is set to. I really encourage you to get in the habit of creating yourself a new project and then click on the source images folder here. We'll select all of these files that are within the source images folder. Right click, choose copy or however your system works, and then locate the project in which you've just created and make sure you're pasting these into the source images folder of your current project. Very good. Alright, so now that we're back to Maya, we're going to go through and save this file. So File, Save Scene As, and by default you can see it's going to our current project that we just created into the Scenes folder. We really want to see that it's going directly to the Scenes folder. If you're finding that it's going to some other subfolder, you might want to consider stopping what you're doing, going back to setting your project, and making sure that when you go to save the file by default, it goes directly to that Scenes folder. Alright, so for this one, we're going to call this one Ch3 Sullivan, and then I'm going to call this one V1, as in version 1. You might find, and I encourage you to save your file under different versions as you go through, just on the off chance that when you create something, should it go corrupt, you always have a file to go back to so that way you're not starting all over from scratch. Alright, we're going to click Save and choose Continue. So there's many different ways in which you can create an image plane. Last chapter we did so by going to View and going to Image Plane, and we chose Import Image. Now that's completely fine. You can do that way. Another way of doing things is to go to Poly Modeling and choose Polygon Plane. And now this itty bitty little plane exists. We're going to come over to the right side and choose Channel Box. Where it says Poly Plane, I'm going to increase the height and width to 25 by 25 and decrease my subdivisions down to 1 by 1. Now what you see right here is a gray shaded polyplane on top of the grid. So before I get started, I'm actually going to take a brief moment to open up our hyper shader and assign the texture to this, and then we'll duplicate this polyplane once it has the texture assigned to it. Okay? So let's call this one, in the outliner, we're going to call this one Template 1. Okay, we'll call this Template 1. We don't really know what it looks like yet, so let's go to Windows. Let's go down to our rendering editors and open up the Hypershade. Alright, so now that we're in the Hypershade, if you don't have all the panels and windows that I'm looking at, you can easily add them to your screen by going into the Hypershade menu just like we did. Go to Window and choose Create. You can go back to Window and choose Browser. You can go to Window and choose Property Editor. Those are the three things that we have listed right here. Alright, so to get started, I'm going to add myself a new Lambert. So I'll click once on the Lambert underneath the Create menu. Where it says Lambert 2 right here, we're going to call this one Template. Alright, now for those of you who struggled with assigning a texture to an object, one of the first things you can do is actually choose a color to your new Lambert, just to give it a color. And then I'm just going to move the hypershader off to the side, And if you can see here on top of the polyplane with it selected, I can right click and hold. Let me move up a little bit. Right click and hold and go to Assign Existing Material and choose Template. Now it's obviously not showing in my view plane, but release on top of the word template. And you'll see that bluish cyan color that we chose will now appear. Okay. That being said, now that we know that it's working, we can always come back and select on our template. And next to the color, there's a checker pattern over here. Click on that checker pattern. We're going to scroll down till we see the word File. Click on File. And then it comes back to the property editor over here, and we'll choose the little folder here for us to then navigate to the source image. Once again, I want to point out, because the project was properly created and set, it automatically knows to go directly to the source images folder. All right, the file that we are going to use for our texture is actually called colormap.tiff. Colormap.tiff. So we'll choose open. And now, let me point out to you that when I choose that colormap.tiff file and I click in this lower section where it says image name, notice how it simply starts off, and I'm scrolling to the left, it simply starts off with the word source images / whatever the texture file name is. If you see at any point in time that this is denoted with a C:/ my documents / Maya files / blah 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 blah, that's not okay. We can't be hard-coded, because if you can imagine, when I ask you to submit your Maya file to Canvas and I download that and then I look at it within my own project and I save it to the appropriate folder, this location should be relative, in which case the images that I have under broken arch _ colormap.tiff in my local install will have the exact same texture that you have, or maybe I've modified the texture, etc., but it will work appropriately. So if by chance you have a C:/ or D:/ or a G:, my favorite images, Maya class is the best, whatever your folder structure is, that folder structure comes with this scenes file, and so I won't be able to find your images. So keep that in mind, why it's so important that we set our project and why it's so important that everything stays relative. All right, so I basically, if you recall, I just had this looking with that cyan blue. I just assigned to it a new image, and now we're back to this dull gray and the image isn't appearing. There's two ways of turning it on. One is we can go to the shading menu and go down to hardware texturing. The other way we can do this is by pressing the number 6 key on our keyboard. All right, so now that this is here and we have this selected, I'm going to turn on my rotate tool, which is the E key, and prop this up just a little bit. And you'll see that when I prop it up, I moved it in the positive rotate X direction. So I'm going to give an absolute value of 90 degrees. All right, now we're going to toggle to the 4-way view, and if you need to in these other 3 views, hover over them and press the number 6 key, you'll see what it looks like. So if you would like to move this file up, or this, I should say, this polyplane up to ground level, we can certainly do so at this time. This would be a great time to do it before we go duplicating it. All right. All right. Now, as you notice that we can see the front of this stone archway from the front view, which means that when we duplicate this, we're going to be creating it for the side view. All right. So once again, I've got the object selected, which is the polyplane, also known as template 1. When I press Control D, and I've turned on my rotate tool already, which is the E key, I'm going to press Control D or Command D, depending on what platform you're on. It's going to duplicate this. Now immediately you can see I've been switched to template 2, not template 1. I'm going to give it a slight little rotation here. And once again, once I identify the direction I've rotated it, I will absolutely type in the rotate Y value is 90, so it's perfectly aligned with where it needs to be. All right, now pressing the Enter key over the number pad. When I just did that, it committed this change. If I press the Enter key over the return button by the alphanumeric characters, sometimes on PC, I shouldn't say sometimes, on PCs, Windows-based machines, this value stays blinking versus on the Mac machines, when you press the Enter key, it will commit the change. Okay, so keep that in mind. Next thing we're going to do is move these into place. So once again, I am now looking at, or I have got currently selected, the side view. When I come down here to the side view orthographic location and I press the F key to focus, you can see you can't actually see it. Once again, pressing the number 6 key or going to shading and turning on hardware texturing. Either way will work. We'll turn on the actual texturing for this particular hypershade of the plane. All right, using the W key, we're going to move this backwards. Now, the amount in which you move it back is arbitrary. It really is. I tend to move it about -12 on the X direction because I'm looking at it from the side view. I want to push it back in that direction. And I got to do the same thing for the front view. So this again goes back to where we're at with this one. We want to push it backwards. And so ultimately I'm going to go to a perfect -12 on the translate Z. And you can see the actual templates lined up like this. All right. So make sure you save your file early and often and press save. All right, so to get started with this one, it works a little differently than last chapter. Last chapter, if you recall, we actually started using a polycube, and in this chapter, they recommend trying to use the Create Polygon tool. So let's do just that. Now, before we continue to do this, I want to swipe both of my polyplanes called Template 1 and Template 2. We're going to come over to the right side in the channel box. If your channel box isn't open, you can turn the icon at the top. Make sure you're looking at the channel box here. If by chance you're seeing this upper section and then the middle section for shapes, you're not seeing layers, there is a stippled or dippled little line right here in which you can make this bigger and smaller, and that is how you can turn your layer section in the lower right area. With both of these templates selected, we're going to click on the little blue sphere to the right side. This just created us a new layer, and we're going to rename this layer to templates. Okay? When we're done, press save. Now, because I have both of these selected, when I created that new layer, if you hover over there, you might get a tooltip that says create a new layer with the assigned selected objects. All right, so when I press the V for visibility, both of them disappear because they were both selected when I created that layer. If by chance, and it happens, so not a big deal, if by chance one of your layers or one of your templates doesn't get added to the layer, go back and select that one template, come down to the layer. Now you're going to right click on the layer that you've already created and just simply choose Add Selected Objects. All right, hopefully this video was helpful in getting you started with creating yourself images for templates, different than using an image plane. The next video we'll get started with the actual modeling of our broken archway.